When we talk about trauma, most people imagine something big and obvious, an event so devastating that it shakes the foundation of your life. And yes, sometimes trauma does look like that, but more often it's quieter. It's the constant drip of experiences that slowly train us to doubt ourselves. It's growing up in an environment where love was conditional. It's hearing words that cut deep into your sense of self-worth. It's being ignored, dismissed, or made to feel invisible until eventually invisibility becomes a habit. When you live through trauma, it doesn't just leave scars you can see. It leaves an imprint on how you view yourself and the world. And one of the most painful legacies of trauma is how it teaches us to accept disrespect as though it were normal. And pop, if you were taught early on that your feelings didn't matter, you begin to believe that silence is safer than speaking up. If you learn that love comes with criticism, rejection, or neglect, you begin to equate love with pain. And if the people who were supposed to protect you were the same people who hurt you, your brain wires itself to believe that disrespect is not only expected but unavoidable. And pop, here's the thing, trauma is not just about what happened to you, it's about what it taught you to believe about yourself. It rewires your sense of identity. Instead of knowing deep in your bones that you are worthy of care, respect, and tenderness, and pop, you begin to believe you have to earn them. You start to think, if I'm perfect, if I don't cause trouble, if I'm agreeable, if I swallow my needs, maybe then I'll be loved. And so the training begins. You're trained to tolerate what hurts, and pop, you're trained to ignore the knot in your stomach when someone dismisses you. Pop, you're trained to nod and smile even when your spirit feels bruised. This training is powerful because it's tied to survival. Pop, as children, as teenagers, sometimes even as adults, our nervous system adapts to what keeps us safest in the moment. And sometimes survival means making yourself small. It means staying quiet. It means enduring what you shouldn't have to endure. And in those moments, it feels like strength. It feels like resilience. But over time, and pop, that very same survival strategy becomes the cage that keeps you from living fully. Think about it. How many times have you brushed off a cruel comment by saying, it's not a big deal? And pop, how many times have you stayed in a relationship, a friendship, a job where you were undervalued because leaving felt scarier than staying? Pop, how many times have you laughed at a joke that cut you or apologized for something that wasn't even your fault just to keep the peace? That is the training. That is trauma's voice disguised as your own. Pop, what makes this cycle even harder to break is that our bodies learn the pattern too. Disrespect doesn't just hurt emotionally. Pop, it gets stored physically. Your shoulders tighten. Your chest feels heavy. Your jaw locks. And yet, because it's familiar, and pop, your body tells you it's normal. Familiarity has a way of disguising itself as safety. And so you stay, not because you don't know you deserve better, but because your nervous system has learned that better is unknown, and unknown feels dangerous. But here's the truth, and pop, the fact that you survived that training does not mean you're meant to keep living by it. Trauma shaped you, yes, and pop, it left marks on how you see yourself and how you interact with the world. But it does not define you. It doesn't own your worth. Pop, the roots of trauma explain why you may have accepted disrespect, but they do not excuse anyone who disrespected you. And most importantly, they do not dictate your future. Understanding these roots is the first act of unlearning. Pop, it is the moment you look back and say, I see it now. I see why I stayed quiet. I see why I let that slide. I see why I felt small. But I also see that those patterns came from survival, not from who I truly am. That recognition is powerful. And pop, because once you name the training, you can begin to retrain. You can start to question the thoughts that once felt like truth. And pop, you can start to listen to the part of you that whispers, "This doesn't feel right," instead of silencing it. The courage to unlearn begins with compassion for yourself, not judgment, not shame, compassion. Because every single choice you made to endure disrespect once served a purpose. It kept you safe when safety felt impossible. It helped you survive when survival was all you had. And now, that same courage can be redirected into something new, into learning how to demand and respect, how to set boundaries, how to walk away when your worth isn't being honored. The roots of trauma are deep, but so is your capacity for healing. And healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means refusing to let the past control the choices you make today. It means finally looking at the soil of your story and saying, "This is where I come from, but it is not where I will stay." Because at the end of the day, trauma may have trained you to accept disrespect, but you have the power to unlearn it. One of the hardest truths we ever have to face is this so often, pop. The deepest betrayals don't come from other people. They come from ourselves. Not because we are weak, not because we don't know better, but because trauma and survival taught us to abandon ourselves first in order to avoid being abandoned by others. And pop. And when you've lived through enough pain, betraying yourself feels easier than risking someone else turning their back on you. Self-betrayal shows up in subtle ways at first. It's the quiet voice that says, "Don't bring that up," and pop. It will just cause conflict. It's laughing at a joke that actually hurt just so no one thinks you're too sensitive. It's apologizing when deep down you know you didn't do anything wrong. It's saying yes when your entire body is screaming no. And with time, these small betrayals add up. They accumulate until you can't even recognize where your voice ends and where the expectations of others begin. Think about how often we learn to dismiss our own needs. Someone asks, "Are you okay?" And the automatic answer is, "Pop, I'm fine," even when you're breaking inside. We say it not because it's true, but because we've been trained to believe our pain is a burden. Our needs are too much, pop. Our presence is only valuable when it's easy for someone else. That's self-betrayal. And pop. It's cutting off pieces of yourself so others can be comfortable. And here's the heartbreaking part: over time, and pop. You start to confuse self-betrayal with strength. You tell yourself, "I'm strong because I don't need to complain. I'm strong because I can endure it. I'm strong because I don't ask for help." But that isn't strength, and pop. That's silence disguised as resilience. That's suppression dressed up as maturity. True strength is standing in your truth, and pop, even when it risks disappointing someone else. Self-betrayal also looks like tolerating disrespect over and over again, and pop. Convincing yourself it's not that bad. Maybe it's the friend who never shows up for you, but you keep showing up for them, and pop. Maybe it's the partner who dismisses your feelings, but you keep swallowing your voice to keep the peace. Pop. Maybe it's the family member who crosses your boundaries, but you stay quiet because you don't want to cause tension. And pop. Every time you choose their comfort over your dignity, you abandon yourself. And it gets tricky because the world applauds this behavior. The world calls you kind, selfless, easygoing. But there's a big difference between kindness and self-erasure. There's a big difference between being selfless and being voiceless. What looks like patience on the outside might actually be self-neglect on the inside. Part of recognizing self-betrayal is realizing how automatic it's become. You may not even notice when you're doing it anymore. The words slip out. "It's okay, don't worry about me," without you even thinking. And then later, when you're alone, You feel the heaviness in your chest, that subtle ache that whispers, pop. You abandoned yourself again. That ache is your body telling you the truth, that every time you betray yourself, a piece of you disappears into the shadows. But here's the gift of awareness. Once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. Once you start paying attention to the moments, when you silence yourself, you begin to recognize the pattern. And pop, you notice when you minimize your feelings. You catch yourself when you're about to say yes out of obligation instead of desire. You feel that sting in your gut when someone crosses a boundary and you stay silent. And in those moments of recognition, and pop, you are given a choice. Do I continue the pattern or do I choose myself this time? Choosing yourself is terrifying at first. And pop, the first time you say no without over-explaining, your hands might shake. The first time you set a boundary, your voice might crack. The first time you tell the truth about how much something hurt, you might feel exposed and raw. But that trembling, that shaking, that's not weakness. That's courage in real time. And pop, that's you reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned to survive. And here's the shift. Every time you choose yourself, you retrain your nervous system to believe it's safe. Every time you honor your voice, pop, you prove to yourself that your truth is worth speaking. Every time you refuse to betray yourself for someone else's comfort, you plant a new root in the soil of your identity. One that says, I matter, my needs matter, my dignity matters. The patterns of self-betrayal are not easy to unlearn, but they are not permanent. They are habits born from survival, and habits can be changed. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Slowly, and pop, the automatic yes turns into a thoughtful pause. Slowly, the apology you didn't owe becomes silence. Slowly, the laughter at a cruel joke becomes a steady, that wasn't funny. Slowly, you begin to recognize that honoring yourself doesn't push love away. It makes space for real love to grow. The truth is, and pop, you will never lose people who are truly meant for you by being honest about who you are and what you need. And pop, the only relationships that crumble when you stop betraying yourself are the ones that were built on your silence to begin with. And pop. And when they fall apart, it isn't a loss, it's freedom. Because betrayal may have been your survival strategy once, and pop. But self-honor is the path to healing now. And every time you choose yourself, you rewrite the story of what you deserve. Pop. When we talk about healing from trauma and breaking free from patterns of disrespect, pop, boundaries become one of the most essential parts of the conversation. For many of us, the word itself can feel intimidating. Boundaries often carry a reputation of being harsh or unkind, as though drawing a line means pushing people away or building walls around ourselves. But the truth is, pop, boundaries are not walls, they're bridges. They are the way we connect with others from a place of honesty and self-respect. Boundaries don't shut people out. They invite the right people in. When trauma trains us to accept disrespect and pop, we often learn to live without boundaries. We say yes when we want to say no. We let people take more than they give. We excuse behavior that hurts us. And over time, we begin to believe this is what relationships are supposed to look like: unequal, heavy, one-sided. But living without boundaries is not the same thing as living in love. Love cannot thrive in a space where dignity is absent. And pop, respect cannot survive where there are no limits. Without boundaries, relationships become breeding grounds for resentment, exhaustion, and shame. Boundaries are not about controlling other people. They are about choosing what you will and will not allow in your life. Pop. They are statements of self-worth. Every time you set a boundary, you are saying, I matter enough to protect my peace. I matter enough to honor my needs. I matter enough to stand on the side of my own dignity, and that is one of the most powerful acts of reclamation you will ever make. The difficulty is that for many of us, boundaries weren't modeled in healthy ways. And pop, maybe you grew up in an environment where boundaries were violated constantly, where privacy didn't exist, and where no wasn't an option, where your needs were dismissed as selfish. Or maybe you learned that setting boundaries led to punishment, rejection, or abandonment. So as an adult, the very idea of setting a boundary feels dangerous. It feels like a risk that could cost you love, belonging, or safety. Pop. But here's the paradox. When you live without boundaries, you are already sacrificing love, belonging, and safety, because real connection cannot exist without them. Think about the relationships in your life where you felt the most seen, the most valued, the most safe. Chances are, and pop, those were the relationships where your boundaries were honored, where you could say no without fear. Pop, where your needs weren't minimized or mocked, where your voice carried weight. Pop, that is what true intimacy looks like. Two people respecting each other's limits. And pop, knowing that honoring those limits only strengthens the bond between them. Boundaries are not about rejection. They are about clarity. Pop. They communicate, this is what I need in order to stay connected with you. This is what respect looks like to me. This is the space in which love can exist without harm. Without that clarity, relationships become murky and confusing. Pop. You end up resentful because you feel unseen, or you end up depleted because you've given too much. But when you practice boundaries, you create a map that says, if you want to walk with me, this is the path. If you choose another way, I can let you go without betraying myself. The first time you set a boundary, it will feel uncomfortable. You might even feel guilty and pop, because trauma taught you that putting yourself first is selfish. But here's the truth: boundaries are not selfish. Boundaries are generous. They allow you to give from a place of wholeness instead of depletion. And pop, they create conditions where love can be exchanged without fear. They protect both you and the relationship. And pop, because they remove the silent expectations and resentments that so often corrode connection. Boundaries can sound simple. Statements like, I'm not available to talk right now, or I need you to speak to me with respect, or I won't continue this conversation if you raise your voice. But simple does not mean easy. Speaking those words requires courage and pop, especially when you've been trained to stay quiet. And every time you choose to set a boundary, you risk disappointing someone. But disappointment is not the same thing as disrespect. Pop, and losing someone who refuses to respect your boundaries is not loss, it's liberation. When you reclaim your worth through boundaries, pop, you begin to rebuild your life on a foundation of dignity. You no longer measure your value by how much you endure or how much you sacrifice. And pop, you measure it by how deeply you honor yourself and how courageously you insist on being treated with respect. And pop, and something powerful happens. You stop attracting relationships built on your silence, and you start cultivating relationships built on mutual respect. The truth is, and pop, boundaries are not the end of connection. They are the beginning of authentic connection. They create space for real intimacy, because intimacy requires honesty. They create space for love that doesn't demand your self-erasure. They create space for belonging that doesn't require you to shrink. And every time you hold a boundary, you reinforce the truth that you are worthy of relationships where you can be fully yourself. So when it feels hard, pop. When your voice shakes, when the guilt creeps in, remind yourself of this: boundaries are not about pushing people out of your life. Pop. They are about letting love, respect, and dignity in. And when you choose boundaries, you are not just protecting yourself, you are reclaiming the truth that you have always been worthy of respect. Unlearning is one of the hardest things we will ever do because it requires us to question the very patterns that once kept us safe. Pop. For years, sometimes decades, we've been moving through the world on autopilot, responding in ways that were carved into us by trauma, saying yes when we wanted to say no, staying silent when we wanted to speak, enduring what should never have been tolerated. Pop. Those patterns became our default setting, and in many ways, they protected us when we didn't have other options. Pop. But the thing about survival strategies is this: they are designed to keep you alive, not to help you thrive. And when you've reached the point where survival no longer feels like enough, unlearning becomes the doorway to something greater. Pop. Unlearning is not a single moment of clarity. It's a practice. Pop. It's a daily commitment to catch yourself in the act of old habits and gently choose something new. And pop. And I want to emphasize that word gently, because the temptation will be to turn unlearning into another battlefield, and pop, another place where you criticize yourself for not getting it right fast enough. But healing doesn't grow in shame. It grows in compassion. Every time you catch yourself slipping into an old pattern, instead of saying, and pop, what's wrong with me? The question becomes, what did this pattern once protect me from, and what can I choose instead today? Sometimes practicing unlearning looks as small as pausing before you answer. Someone makes a request, and instead of automatically saying yes, you give yourself permission to take a breath, pop, to ask yourself if this is truly what you want. That pause might feel foreign at first. It might even feel selfish, but it is in that tiny pause that you create the possibility for choice instead of default. That pause is a seed of freedom. Other times, unlearning looks like speaking your truth even when your voice trembles. You say, that hurt me, or I can't do this right now, or I need more respect than this. And the moment after those words leave your mouth, you may feel exposed, raw, even terrified, but that trembling is not weakness. It's your nervous system learning a new rhythm. It's the sound of you stepping into alignment with yourself. Unlearning also means paying attention to the stories you tell yourself, because trauma doesn't just live in our bodies, it lives in our narratives. It tells us, you're too much, or you're not enough, or if you set a boundary, they'll leave you. Those stories get rehearsed until they feel like truth. Pop. Practicing unlearning means noticing when those stories rise up and asking, is this story a reflection of who I am, or is it a reflection of what I survived? That question can be a compass, redirecting you back to your worth every single time. There will be days when unlearning feels exhausting. Pop. When every choice to honor yourself feels like pushing against a tidal wave of old conditioning. That's when community matters. Healing is not meant to be done in isolation. Surround yourself with people who respect your no, who celebrate your boundaries, and pop, who remind you of your worth when you forget. Practicing unlearning in the presence of safe relationships accelerates the process. Pop. Because you begin to experience a new truth firsthand, that you can be loved and respected without betraying yourself. Pop. And I want to be honest about this. Practicing unlearning is not linear. You will have moments where you fall back into old patterns, and pop. You'll catch yourself apologizing for something that wasn't your fault. You'll notice you stayed quiet when you wanted to speak up. You'll feel that old familiar ache of self-betrayal. But instead of letting those moments pull you into shame, pop. See them as reminders of how deeply ingrained those patterns were and how much courage it takes to break them. Every step forward, and pop, no matter how small, is proof of your healing. With time, the things that once felt terrifying begin to feel natural. Pop. The no that used to shake in your throat comes out steady. The boundary that once made you feel guilty now feels like second nature. And pop. The stories that once held you hostage lose their grip, and slowly, almost without noticing, and pop. You realize that you're no longer living as the person trauma trained you to be. You're living as the person you were always meant to be. Pop. Practicing unlearning is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to yourself. It's about peeling back the layers of silence, fear, and self-doubt to uncover the truth that was there all along, that you are worthy of love, of respect, of belonging, simply because you exist. And every day you practice unlearning, you step closer to embodying that truth. Because in the end, healing is not about perfection. It's not about never slipping into old patterns again. And pop. Healing is about choosing yourself more often than you abandon yourself. It's about honoring your voice more often than you silence it. It's about demanding respect more often than you excuse disrespect. Healing is about practice, and practice creates change. And the more you practice, the more your life begins to align with the truth. Pop. You were never meant to live in survival forever. You were meant to live in freedom.